Welcome to Working with Languages. My name is Sonia Kampshoff. I'm your host and a multilingual digital marketing consultant. If you have ever wondered how the travel industry is changing, and in particular the technology that powers it, this conversation is for you. Fritz Oberhummer has lived and worked in a number of countries. He views languages as a means for getting things done when working in international teams. The conversation then moves over to AI and technology, and how the way we travel is already changing. Before we dive in, I would like to apologize for the audio quality. I had some technical issues, but I think you'll agree that the conversation makes up for it. Hello. Today, my guest on the podcast is Fritz Oberhummer. Hello, Fritz.
Hi, Sonia. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
It's great to have you here on a podcast. So Fritz works in technology in the travel industry, and he is the head of solution architecture for EMEA at Sabre Corp. And he's going to tell us more about his job in detail later on. But first of all, would you like to tell us your favorite word in a language that you speak?
Well, there's two favorite words to say, and I think the second was actually three words in one, but I think the context is interesting. First of all, I speak a little bit of Ukrainian. So my favorite word in Ukrainian is "Дякую," which means thank you. And it sounds really nice when you say it. And the second would be in Spanish, which is "todo bajo control," which means everything's under control, which is kind of like a joke I had together with my wife on days when things are rough. So because we lived in Spain, "todo bajo control" sounds really nice.
That's very, very nice. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background, your upbringing, your education? Where did you learn the languages that you speak?
Sure. So I grew up in Austria in a ski resort, and my family has a hotel there since 3 generations. So from a very young age, I was used to having people from all kinds of countries, languages around me. So it was very natural for me always to kind of try to talk to people where I wouldn't even speak the language. Now, because so many people came to us, I always wanted to explore the world and go out there. So with first bigger trip on my own was with 12 years old. I went to New York. So I had some friends there. Who at that time lived in the Hamptons. It's a very, very nice area around New York. And for me, it was very interesting to choose to explore not only a different language, but also the culture. And I went there again when I was 14 years old and spent the summer in the US. And that gave me the taste to live somewhere else and explore countries and languages. And that desire hasn't left me. So when I was finally done with school, I left home on a dime and moved to London. I lived 2.5 years in London, where I had the first kind of culture shock, discovering that English doesn't necessarily mean English, right? I worked in a hotel in Knightsbridge, and I had colleagues here from the UK, and some of them were Scottish and some were Irish. And my first boss, he was Scottish. And I remember the first time he spoke to me and I couldn't understand a single word he said. And he just looked at me and said, "Oh, that's all right, bud." And I finally understood like whatever he said was a good thing for me. So I think one of the first things you discover about languages is when you go to countries that the language you've learned in school, which was English, is certainly not the same once you're in the country. And also the way how you would express yourself in that language. So through my career, and I went down to the US and lived in California for a while. And I tried to kind of use my English skills, what I'd learned in Great Britain. And I had trouble people understanding me. Simple things like, "May I have a glass of water?" It just didn't fly because most Americans say, "Can I have a glass of water?" My pronunciation was really off. And other stuff that I used to say, where people look at me like, "Okay, you speak a bit funny." Well, English in London, and then I explained it, but I wanted then start to learn and understand, okay, language is coming in a different kind of context. Now, I then had to, when I came back to Europe, I moved to Munich, I spent some time there, and then started to work for Expedia travel company, a big one, where I made some nice career progress and finally came to a decision point to move to another country for a new job within the organization. And the country was Spain, it was Madrid. Because my boss at that time, he was from Madrid and was filling out the office and I was still there. which brought me into a real culture shock because I didn't speak Spanish. I learned some Italian when I was young. I spent some time in Italy when I was young in Firenze, and I always did French in school. Made to A-levels, but I never used the language. So you airdropped into a country, you don't speak the language. Now, common knowledge would have it that you go to another big capital in Europe and people understand you when you speak English. That doesn't necessarily happen in Spain. Spanish is not widely spread there. Most people just are very proud to speak Spanish, and it's expected of you to speak Spanish. So I had a tough time in the beginning, adopting to it. Same for my wife, we both didn't speak Spanish. In the beginning, we stood in the supermarket and you put in the things, you're like, diablo, and just, you'd be lost. And I went there with, I was over 40 years old, and I had to learn a complete new language with that. It's very difficult at the beginning. It gets better after a while. And then you kind of like get into the jokes, you understand some of the culture, and you learn a lot watching TV like anyone does. So my recommendation, if you go to a country where you don't know the language and you go to classes, just watch TV series, local, whatever, telenovelas, really trying to understand the culture from a TV series. Because there's a lot of things from a language point that I understood, but I didn't understand the cultural context where it was in. So my wife and I had spent a lot of time watching TV series like Los Reyes Católicos, Fernando Isabel, about their story and just the whole history of Spain. Then you would understand some of the jokes, some of the behavior, and also understand like there's more than just to Spain in the Spanish language, because it has this very strong heritage from being in the Osmanic Empire for many hundreds of years, and it has left an impression in the culture and the society. For example, guitar is obviously something that came from that culture as well, but also a bit of the drama and all of that. So it's definitely there. So the cultural way to approach such a country is not to say, okay, I'm learning the language and I'll still behave like a German, which I did at the beginning. That means in meetings, I was pressing my boss to get things done. And I didn't get anywhere. And I was really, for me, it was like being used to like the Germanic and kind of way of working, or even having lived in the UK and the US, I was still, after I lived 15 years in Munich, and I was very Germanic, so to say. And it took
Sorry to interrupt. So was your boss Spanish?
He was Spanish.
And the other people on your team?
A mixture, all kinds of cultures, a lot of Spanish people from anywhere, from the Nordics, from Germany, Southern Europe, French. So there was a whole hodgepodge of different cultures influencing it. But the office culture in Spain was very Spanish.
Okay.
So you had to understand if you needed something from my boss, the best if we go and have lunch. And if it's a really hard topic, I'll drop it at the end after lunch. And I think this is one of the interesting points I wanted to bring to this today. Languages themselves are one thing. So you can learn a language, you can understand the culture, but the biggest problem with working in languages is conflict situations. How do you deal with a conflict situation in a different language? And that's very, very hard, because there's some certain kind of cultural norms and way how you express yourself in those situations, which can help you a lot, or definitely can be something that can be misconstrued. What's hard for me in the beginning, sometimes in the UK, you would never really say a hard thing very straight out forward, right? The German way is like, let's put it on the table. This is what it is. That will never work here. So I think that's interesting. And even less so in Spain or in France or in Italy, some of the southern cultures of Europe. The way you would also put such bad things forward in the US is you put it with a lot of positivity around it and say the very hard thing, and then make some another positive comment, because that's what's expected of you. So I was struggling a lot with that until I finally found a book called The Culture Map from EMEA, which I really recommend to anyone. EMEA, she's great. There's other books she's written, but this was probably her signature book, and explains to you how other countries and cultures work and behave. And then you need to understand and read that, and then put the language cultural context with it.
Very interesting. So how long do you think it took you to get into the culture in Madrid? Was it months?
Yeah, I think I'd say years, actually, to be honest.
Years.
And I was only there for 2.5 years, which very unfortunately was cut short by COVID. And I'd love to stay in Madrid maybe some more years to really get really deep into it. Because my English level, my Spanish level is something in a B2. My wife is Spanish, so she really just C1 or C2 levels already. So some more years would have been super, super helpful. So I feel like I haven't discovered everything there is.
For listeners who are not familiar with B2 and C2, that's sort of an intermediate level.
Exactly, that's an intermediate level. So you can get on by situations. And I had started to have some conversations in Spanish business meetings as well, although people were reverting to English and they still do. But even now, when I go there, I will try to at least have conversations with local people, taxi drivers, or in Spanish to kind of get back it. But I still miss something. And I think also brings up the point that if you really want to learn a language, you have to live in a country at least 3 to 4 years to really get into the weeds of it. And that probably is any country around the world. 1 to 2 years will cover your basics and your basic understanding, but really get into the really 4 years. So a recommendation, learn a language by going to a country and living there, because that's the only way you can really learn to understand how the culture works around the language. The second one is you have to stay some years.
Yeah, I agree. It does. It just moving to a country, first of all, it takes a few months. I always think of 5-6 months for you to adjust and learn the new routine and the basics of living there, and then sort of your mind can move on to the next level of moving to a different country, and that involves learning the language deeper and the culture deeper. And you're right, it does take even a few years to really get into this deep level of understanding of language and culture.
I think as well, when you manage a global team, which I did in EMEA, and you have people from different time zones and different countries, as well, when you have them all in the same meeting, you always have to find a suitable middle ground to make sure you're there. So this is why at that time there's a lot of training programs, how to talk to people, how to express yourself. There's one way of culture that the company built around that. And that's super important, super helpful. And to be honest, there are still countries where I have a hard time until today, to crack through the code. China for me was an interesting thing at one of my jobs. I worked with a local Chinese company at HRS who worked for the company, getting hotel profit or getting hotel breakdowns and payments in and out. And we had a local development team there as well. So it just always felt like something escapes kind of my conversation there. And I think as well, that will be one of those places, like if you want to know China, you probably have to live there more than 3 or 4 years. You have to really live for a long time there to really understand a lot of the nuance and how things are said and being done, which I think also when it comes to such countries comes from the way they construct the language and how they write it. Here we have our very phonetic language in the Western Hemisphere. There they work a lot with pictograms, right? It's like but the language is like, it's like pictures, so to say. You interpret those pictures in the different kind of pronunciations and arrangements and how that language is written, then kind of like changes what the sentence would mean. And that's something where, like, if you have a conversation with somebody in English who is from China, even though you speak the same kind of language, the outcome understanding for the person might be very different than it is for you. And there's a few moments where very painfully I made this experience. And I think as well, you have to be aware that certain countries, it will be hard for you to understand it even after years.
So you said that your stay in Madrid was cut short by COVID. What did you do then? Where did you move to?
So as my wife got a job in Austria, we stayed on in Austria because Oberhummer is nice for my kids as well to kind of feel a bit of home as well. Because one of the things with moving around with your kids is you get a feeling that they have no sense of where they really belong. So we spent some 4 years in Austria. My youngest kids started primary school there and kind of gotten a lot of the root and the culture and a lot of the Austrian accent as well and the slang words and everything. So that's really interesting. But they would identify that as well as home. But we always said, okay, come on, let's go somewhere else. And then an offer came up with Sabre, my current employer, who is one of the biggest flight ticket distributors in the world, to work for them. And they said they wanted to come and that I should come work for them. It was interesting, even having lived here moving back to UK with a family, you discover a lot of things again, and you discover how different the culture is. Nonetheless, I think London is one of those places in the world where everybody comes together, and a lot of those cultures can coexist in a very peaceful manner, which just makes this many places in the world. So coming back here now is a new challenge as well, to make sure that the whole family as well is deeply integrated into the British society, and the way things work here. It's different, and the way you speak to people is different. And then I see some of those pains that I've gone through when I came here first for my family as well. Talk to somebody from Scotland or from Ireland or from Wales, when they have those different accents and it fully throws them off. So I think after this first year now, I think they're starting to break into this. So it's interesting to see someone else making the same experience.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more what your job involves, what the company you work for does, and maybe a bit more about the team you work with, and what you do?
So interestingly enough, I'd say I'm a translator of languages as a head solution architect. So I'll translate the languages of commercial into the languages of tech and back. One of my jobs is to understand what the landscape is on the market, and work with strategic initiatives with our partners out there, the big travel agencies who are partners with us, and see how our technical offering would stack up against their business problems. Because this role was especially created for me, that didn't exist before, because we have now moved from a world where sales used to be a very kind of commercial driven process, but now, especially in technology, is going more into a consultative technology process. So you have to have people who understand the language from the tech guys of the building, but can translate this into commercial teams for the C-level board of both companies, or our leadership team here, the other leadership team. So I'm an intermediary, and who I work with all the different business units, product teams, technology integration teams, the sales team, of course, but also with our marketing teams and PR teams and campaigns. And it's a very interesting role as our world changes, and this translation of technical requirements into business requirements, and how it should be told, how the story needs to be told, has become very different than maybe even 5 to 10 years ago.
And what changes have you seen in the last 2 years, not only from a technology point of view, also travel? Of course, COVID was a pretty big change for travel. First, no one was allowed to travel, and then people were allowed again to travel, but we now travel differently. What kind of an impact has it had on your business and on the work you do?
So I think one of the things now with the travel industry is a lot of those processes that were going on already were just sped up by a factor of 10. So there's a lot of consolidation that happened in the travel sector, and travel now is a lot of less smaller companies and a few big companies who dictate the scheme. Now, we've now come into a world where there's a lot of unrest, turmoil, there's wars, there is political kind of issues, and that all puts strain on travel. And I think everybody feels that. So I think that's on one side, is this uncertainty, this is scripted travel space, and we can still feel that. It's not COVID anymore, but it's uncertainty of today's world. On the other hand, technology has progressed so fast and so quickly, especially in the last 3 years, because one of the things I do in my current companies, I work on the go-to-market strategies for our AI products. And the thing that the AI products now do is they help travelers on the road. So there's a saying called the traveler's journey. It's really, that means from the moment that there's a traveler's head about that he wants to go, not even where, but where he wants to go, and where he researches, where he books, where he gets on that car, on the plane, where he is on the destination and comes back, his travel journey. A lot of those points are not automated today still. But we're very quickly now moving in a world where all of that gets fully automated, and that's for the use of AI agentic models. So little agents driven by AI who can do things for you. They can reroute your flight, they can cancel a hotel, they can make it in a reservation. And that's all being put in together in this whole journey. So it becomes way more integrated than before, which is much, much easier for you as a traveler. Now, some years ago, on my personal blog post, I wrote about an idea how facial recognition technology and AI to get out will help you to change them in such a way that you potentially could just walk out the building, get a taxi, go to the airport, fly, get out, get to the hotel. You don't never need any ID, any credit card, no nothing, because your facial recognition would be your passport to the world. It's all automatically built uh, into your credit cards. Everything's connected to that. And that was just a lofty vision. But that's moving into very quickly into a direction that will happen, because now we have digital wallet IDs, we have digital passports. There is exchange tokens, how those identities can be exchanged between those different points along your travel. And I think very soon we'll come to a point where travel will be much, much easier to do. Less paperwork, less passports, less travel, and there's going to be way more personalization based on where you are. Now, that sounds all a bit scary. In a way, they're like, okay, AI is taking over, and I don't want my facial recognition to happen. But there is a thing when I talk to people about this, is like, if you get to the airport and you go to the kiosks where you put your passport in, right, to walk through, it's the fast check. Would you rather stand in line and let somebody you in check this, or do you take the other one where it takes you 20 seconds to go through? And I was like, well, I take this other one. It's like, well, your face does get scanned. And there's initiatives all along the way that your face gets scanned, it really does, and attached to your wallet, and you can buy things with that. You don't card or anything. Or you can access a lounge just with your facial identity, or you can access the hotel room also just by your facial identity. So I think that's coming, or just by the so what you have, and it sends a signal and it opens up the door for you. So for me, that's both scary but interesting, and that's also gonna help us to move quicker through the world.
I think that convenience makes a big difference. As soon as you make something convenient, like going through an electronic passport check in a faster way, that makes it's easier to get people on board to use it. It's just that convenience. It's very interesting. So you're not talking only about booking a trip or a plane or a hotel. It's really the whole experience, which is something that most people in everyday life who are not in the business, they don't think about that. And going back to the aspect of security, do you think that enough is being made to keep the information and the data confidential and safe? And how do people feel about it?
So there are, I'm in part of different working groups who work on facial identity or identification. And there's also a Berlin startup I know called Neoki who kind of work on that. And that's a combination of the private sector and the public sector. There's a lot of effort being put into how can we make sure that this is a very secure process, but along the traveler's way, this can be tracked, and it's going to be becoming a part of the trip. There'll be countries like in China where you need to commit to yourself that your face will be scanned, right?
Yeah.
So that you can't get in otherwise. Or if you go to the Middle East, for example, to Dubai, they will scan your face. There's identity laws don't exist in the form like they do here. So I think it's part of a safety initiative. Now there's a lot of crypto technology that's been used to make sure it's super safe. And the stuff I've seen so far is really, really good. So we'll definitely go in that direction. And I think that the government is involved in this. It is not something of a deep state, but just really something to say, let's put a proper framework in place that all people can agree to, and all the parties who are along this traveler's journey can agree to have certain kind of rules. So for me, I'm not so concerned about the security of this, because for the most part, it's been done today already. And it's something that is moving forward very fast. It's also if you look at the iPhone, for example, that just released last year a very deep integration into facial recognition connected to your digital passport and how that can be used. So everybody's used to open up an iPhone just with facial recognition. So that's just maybe one more step where the device connects to another thing. Just like, can you scan your face? And then eventually I think it will be so convenient to use this. People will not want to queue anymore. We'll have this effect like with the passport, I said.
Absolutely. That's something that not everybody thinks about, but you're right. And I can see many examples in everyday life where we already are using that. A few years ago, for example, when I became a British citizen, part of the process was, and we're talking about 2017, They didn't take my facial recognition, but they wanted to have my finger imprints. Otherwise, I would not have been eligible for British passport. So I think it is just, how it is the direction that we are moving into. Very interesting. I normally ask my guests how they use AI. I think you've covered already a lot.
Yes, I think there's some interesting aspects about AI that I discovered in the last few months and the limitations of it, but also how you can announce it. Now, if you think, what is AI? AI is just a computer analysis of human text that puts connections between the words called vectors, and it's called RAG, retrieve augmented. Well, obviously, what it means, but it basically means that you say, this is a long text. What kind of vectors between those words could I use to make something new out of it? So an AI is nothing else but interpretation of human text and words. This is why AI is having such a hard time with code, by the way, which we just find out when we did an upgrade from a Google version to a newer Google version, and all of a sudden a code interpreter wouldn't work anymore. Now, the interesting thing is if you think, okay, it's a problem out because you can't do code, but how do you interact with AI? Most people, what they do is they would type something with AI, right? They would type something in prompt. Now, that's actually the worst thing you can do. And let me explain why. Because when you type something on the computer, we as a society have been trained to not write long emails, but condense everything you write to someone else. Communication needs to be short. Whether it's in WhatsApps, whether that's in emails, any kind of communication, or 140 characters in Twitter, we do things short. But in reality, when we talk much, much more longer, and we give much more context and thought about this. So with that being said, is the best way to work with AI is use your voice. Record what you think, what you're doing, because your thought process of how you get to something, how you describe the process, will be better for the AI to understand your intent than typing it in. Because when you think about something, you will start to condense it down, and then you will start to type. So that just for the AI is a bit like it's one block, but when you talk about it, you will talk about the different aspects, different steps, and allows the AI to understand your thought process and give you a much better answer. So I've started to do it myself, with also with coding, but also with projects and ideas. I just talk via microphone, and the results are vastly different and much, much better. So I think it's weird, obviously, talk to your AI, but very quickly, I think it will become the standard kind of way how people will get better results from AI. So everybody will be sitting in front of their microphones. And there's some great videos you can watch. Some developers who just talk to the AI, and it develops while they talk and they interfere, and they cannot interact with it. Now, much quicker now than the clumsy way of typing, which is just a leftover for us having to type something, and can't be a lot, because even when you think, where does typing come from? It comes from typewriters. Typewriter paper was expensive, and you couldn't put a ton of papers into a letter. So we've started to condense our information and thought into smaller pieces, which this actually goes the other way around now. We have to expand again how much we say, the more the better.
Very interesting. Never thought about that.
That's the language of AI, and it's going to be an interesting one to figure out.
So can you give us some examples of how you use it, either at work or in your private life, or both?
So I think mostly I use it for analysis of companies that I come across, the technologies I come across. So for me to build a context of, to say, that's a company, that's a technology, what kind of competitors do we have, what developments do we have, how could I sum this up, what architectural pieces do we need? And I also bring in then some commercial questions, what kind of models is being used with that, and to build more of a coherent thought process to how do I attack strategic problems that we might have, to say, hey, we have a product, we're going to take it to the market, or with a client with a certain kind of thing, what does it translate to when it comes to technology? AI is super helpful for that. It doesn't take away all the work, but it gives you a very quick initial pattern of thoughts that you can build on and then refine rather quickly. So I think that's really good, and that's what I use it mostly for. I don't play with it as much, images and stuff like that. What I try to do is some of my coding work with it. Still not happy with that. I think it's still clumsy in some aspects. And there's good integration with GitHub Copilot, for example. It's a technology integration, how you can code. But I think for the most part, any kind of thought patterns where you need to bring different things together to get a first draft and framework, that's what AI is really good for and use it for that.
Do you think that there are any industries or countries that are more in tune with AI, or some other ones that are taking a bit longer to adapt to the changes?
Mostly in Europe, we were a bit behind. We started to lag behind. China is forging ahead with AI at an incredible pace. Putting a lot of resources into this and a lot of process into this as well. And I think as well, other countries, third world countries, as you might call them, probably going to leapfrog a lot of what we do here. But saying like this really helps us to get things done. So I think mostly China and in the lead, of course, the US, where a lot of the AI technology comes from, where it's been used. Now, one of the problems you will have with that is the rapid progress of AI, the rapid progress how jobs get taken away. For example, in China, you have a lot of automation in factories where it's fully end-to-end automated with robots and everything, all AI driven. But it means people get driven out of work. And that's something where I think the scary part for me, AI, is not so much that the AI is gonna, rule the world like in a Terminator movie. No, it's the problem is very similar to what happened when the car and the railways came into this world, and horses all of a sudden become distinct fairly quickly. And so everybody had to do with horses, had to find a new job. Now, this is much more massive, especially with agentic AI. All the people who work as agents in call centers, support functions, their jobs might be gone in 3 to 4 years. But what do you do with those people? And those are, especially in India, in Indonesia, and all of those countries where there's a lot of effort have been put over years to put people as call centers and infrastructure. All of a sudden, that's all gone. People are out on the street. So I think we'll have a big transition phase coming up. I think there's a very good known principle called the Kondratiev wave. Have you ever read about that?
No.
So Kondratiev wave is any groundbreaking moment in human history that will change us forever. That was industrialization. There was the internet age. And probably now we've come to one of the biggest called the AI age. And we're right in the middle of it. So you will not see the effects as you live in it. But as you progress forward, you do. And our job landscape will completely change, because a lot of the manual work that's being done right now by people is going to be replaced very quickly by AI agents. It's a bit of a scary bit. I think humankind will pull through, then new jobs will be created, or old jobs will come out of their obscurity to say handcrafted things in a very special way, or handmade books. There's going to be those things that are going to be precious, and the handcrafted part of it is going to be precious, but our jobs are just going to go away. And I think that will lead to further social unrest in the world as well. That's one aspect we haven't thought about. If you put so many people out of a job so quickly, what will this do to countries and economies where people are all of a sudden almost out of a job? Because if you have an AI agent versus a regular travel agent, you might not need them for most things, but companies will get used to the fact that, okay, there's a big disruption like COVID, where, for example, Expedia had 60,000 calls an hour. Now, everybody within the company had to get on the phones, and agents were there to handle it all. In reality, you could spool up 60,000 AI agents to handle that as well. And I think that kind of scalability you get through AI eradicates whole job families fairly quickly. And that's a very scary piece. So we'll have to see how that actually plays out.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's something that individuals and governments and companies need to think about and address and come together to find a solution together. But yeah, it is something that we don't really know the solution yet. We still have to work it out. So this is really all I wanted to ask you. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we haven't covered?
A question for you, maybe. What's for you the biggest challenge you had in your career life when it came down to languages? What obstacle did you overcome with, that's related to language, and was a real obstacle for you in life?
I don't think I've ever had any obstacles in languages. For me, languages have always been a plus, a pro, something that I could add to my set of skills. I think for me, when it came to languages, it was more about how do I want to use them? What kind of career do I want to have? And I started as a translator. At university, my bachelor was in translation studies. And then, translations can be a very wide area. What exactly do you want to translate? And I remember thinking, what do I want to specialize in? The university that I attended, some of my colleagues went on to work for EU institutions, for example. And I thought it's a great options, but then again, I knew that I wanted to be geographically independent of where these institutions were located. I also considered more creative options, for example, translating travel guides. Again, that sounded really nice, but in the end, I opted for something completely different, probably a little bit at the opposite spectrum, and that was localization. So translating software, both what you see on the screen, but also everything goes on behind the screen. And from there, I developed it. I then went on to work for a startup in the fintech sector. And for me, I never saw it as a challenge. It was more about how do I want to develop it? Where do I want to live? Which industry do I want to work with? And which people do I want to work with? And what the product or service is that I wanted to help promote.
Okay, and the second question is, if you had a magic wand, what language would you want to speak?
I think I'm very curious about Asian languages. I've never studied any of them because it feels like they're so different to any European languages that I've studied and that I know. And it feels like a mammoth task, but I feel like I'm drawn to them, even the different way of writing and the different way of thinking, because a language really reflects the way people think and what they wish to express. So I think if I were to learn a new language a little bit or more in depth, it would probably be an Asian language.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here.
I loved this conversation. There is so much depth to it. From his suggestion to watch local TV shows to not only learn the local language, but also understand cultural nuances, to his examples of when and how to address difficult topics based on the culture of the person you are interacting with. As a self-described translator between the commercial and the technical worlds in the travel industry, his depth of knowledge is second to none. He also makes the case for a future of travel based on a seamless experience and convenience. I love his positive note that while AI will remove some jobs, we will also see the rise of handmade local goods, driving jobs in this area. If you would like to connect with Fritz, you can find all the links in the show notes. And please do share this episode with someone you think may enjoy it too.